Okay, hi. So there's a massive paradox going on that's fascinating. So I'll go through that real quickly. So you have a massive two groups that are sort of separate in many, completely separate really, except for a little bit of overlap. Maybe you call those libertarians or something, but not really. They're not. But so you have this group, mass hysteria, herd mentality in both these groups. So one was completely swallowing the COVID narrative and the medical intervention that came along supposedly to solve that, which it didn't, of course. So you have that massive hysteria that I had to fight for 2 or 3 years trying to get through to people. This is a stunningly weak virus, and that's all you ever needed to know. No more deadly than an average cold. That is easy to prove, right? But I won't do it here. So you have this massive herd mentality, mass formation, hypnosis, and that's what it looks like it is to me now. So massive pushback against anyone who questioned any of the mainstream narrative at that time during the years 2020, 2021 and 2022. And so there's another group that did more questioning of the narrative, yeah? So those are sort of left-wing oriented mostly, who were pushing for the COVID narrative, like a mad, hysterical stampede over everybody. And now this other group was pushing back against it and questioning it, right? So these are sort of left-wing and right-wing. And so the right-wing group, more or less right-wing, it's a broad, there's a lot of grey area. So I consider myself a left-wing libertarian these days because of, in the American sense of libertarian, not the French sense. So left-wing libertarian, maybe that's the same thing. So I consider myself that now, since all this great madness. So this right-wing group is essentially, was pushing back on the COVID narrative to a large extent. You saw it all. They were blamed for everything. They were told they were conspiracy theorists, where a lot of those conspiracies came true. And so I was starting to think, oh, this is weird. The right wing seems to be right, correct, on this topic. And then Israel-Gaza came along, and you had this massive switch. So these people who, in my opinion, were in mass formation hypnosis, herd mentality, pushing for the COVID narrative and the medical intervention narrative, which was all lies and propaganda, and it's all about making money. Vampire capitalist, big pharma, and that's it. That's what it is. And they've done a great job. Well done. They did a great job on making a load of money. So that group was mentally ill during that period, no question about it. And there's other periods in past where you can show something similar. But this was all propagated by the media, the sensationalism, by the so-called experts who were just wrong, right? Completely wrong. And then they that group just went mad, hysterical, stampede, fascism, right? The other group, right-wingers, pushed back against that COVID and medical narrative, right? So, but now it's the opposite. The more or less sort of left-wing group, not a lot of grey area in that as well, but more or less left-wing, are seeing through the propaganda about Israel and Gaza and pushing back against it. What were the COVID people who questioned the narrative? Those are now psycho-fascists for the mass murder of Gazans. Israel, right? And so you've got these two forces now. You've got the ones who are trying to say stop mass murdering people, right? And there's a long history to this whole story. It cannot be just said October the 7th. Much more complex than that. And there were a lot of lies told on October the 7th, which are easily provable now. So you've got this left-wing group. So now I feel like I'm more on the side of the left-wingers. Before, I kind of felt I was on the side of the right-wingers. I don't know if I'm holding up the right hand here for maybe it gets switched, I hope not. But anyway, so the left-wingers, that's my left hand, so were crazy, mad, mentally ill over the COVID narrative and everything that went along with it for 2 or 3, 4 years. And the other group were sort of against that, pushing back. many, what we mostly call right-wing, and they were called right-wing, extreme right-wing by the mainstream media during that time, during the COVID narrative. Now, that group is mostly the left-wing group who were mentally ill during COVID, in my opinion, and I can prove it. Because you cannot be considered competent if you got that caught up in what was a mental mad stampede of mass formation hypnosis. They were hypnotized. It is possible to mass hypnotize people, not very deliberately. It just happens if you have enough fear and sensationalism and authoritarianism. It just kind of happens almost by itself. And on the other side, the right wing were pushing back against that. But now it's the left wing who are seeing through the propaganda regarding Israel and Gaza, right? And the right wing are like this mad herd mentality. People who I was really respecting before on the right wing, I followed them because they were pushing back against the great madness, I call it, which is the COVID narrative, during 2020, 2021, right? And so I was feeling I might be more right-wing or something, right? So they pushed back on COVID, but now they're mad hystericists on Israel, Gaza. So they're in a mass formation hypnosis. So how that one occurred, similar to COVID, how that one occurred and affected the right wing, what happened was that you had all these atrocity stories of October the 7th, and plus all the other things. 9/11 was supposedly done by Muslims, so that all of that builds up. And Muslims bad, all that, been going on for decades. But you add to that October the 7th, which we now know was almost all lies and propaganda, and a group of very amateurish people trying to break out of that sort of almost like a prison camp they'd been in for decades and bombed. People died in Gaza from Israeli bombs in the year 2023 before October the 7th. Children, innocent civilians in Gaza. So now this right-wing group has gone full mental. Now they have the full force. See, this left-wing group, what's so fascinating is they had the full force of big pharma and vast corporate control. The left-wingers were completely controlled by, and some people in between, obviously, completely controlled by massive corporate greed, vampire capitalism, right? Now you've got the right-wingers who are now being controlled in their minds, mass hypnosis and hysteria and just plain old herd mentality. They're being controlled by the military-industrial corporate media complex. So it's all just a mess. It's not some conspiracy. It's not like some kind of somebody's in charge of either of those things. It's just human stupidity coagulates together and becomes this mess. In this case, the right-wingers are being controlled. Their minds are being controlled by mass formation hypnosis by the military, industrial, corporate media, news media complex. And so now they're fighting against each other on this topic. And they were fighting against each other on the COVID narrative. The COVID narrative, left-wingers were being controlled, mostly left-wingers being controlled by the big pharma mafia, basically, sort of mafia, right? So giant corporate greed. So ironic. You can understand the right-wingers going for the military-industrial complex. They've always done that. And it's all fed by this October 7th lies and propaganda that rile people's brains up. Then you're told what to hate and who to hate, right? And who's right and who's wrong. Because your brain has been riled up in fear, you herd together with the group you think is right, and you're told to look over there, it's their fault, right? And you must hate on those people, So a lot of right-wingers did say things like everyone in Gaza is responsible for October the 7th and they should all be punished, basically. Things like that, right? Mad, right? It's mad. And I don't know who my people are because I don't have anybody Who thinks the same as me? I don't know anybody, right? Really. So the right-wingers are mad over Gaza, Israel. You know, all these Christians, born-again Christians, have gone pro-Israel, right? It's weird. It's just weird. They think there's a second coming or something, like ridiculous. I can't go there, it's too complex. But and then these left-wingers during 2020 and 2021, 2022, 23, were just mad, mentally insane. Mass formation hypnosis. Now, most of them on both sides are still in that. So they can't even hear what I'm saying. They're in a state of hypnosis. They can't hear what I'm saying. You know, if you ever see a hypnotist, they're able to make people do things that they wouldn't normally do, supposedly. I don't know if it's real, but it is real. Hypnosis is real. And when you see this whole fear on both these situations come up, this massive fear-mongering that gets sensationalized in the news, and the politicians rile it up even further, and more fear-mongering. 40 babies had their heads chopped off on October the 7th was a lie, right? That was a lie. Ooh, all these guys, let's all herd together and become fascists, right? COVID is right outside your door, and 2020, all right? And it's going to kill you and your children. All these left-wingers and some right-wingers, let's all go crazy, herd together and become fascists. So this is the world I've found myself in at 63 years old. This is bizarre. Yeah, the thing in Gaza is disgusting to me, what they're doing to Gaza. And what they did to people in the COVID narrative, with the lockdowns, the hate, the violence against people, killing some people actually, and then of course the medical intervention, which is given to almost everybody and forced on a lot of people, was a lie by Big Pharma, right? It doesn't work. It doesn't save anybody. And COVID mostly killed a tiny percent of the elderly population. That's what you saw in those numbers on those graphs, was mostly a very tiny percent of a massive elderly population, the biggest elderly population we've ever had on Earth and in every country. So that's what that was, a tiny percent of the elderly and a couple of others. And some of it was nocebo effect. So if you rile people up to that extent and tell them death is right outside their door, they will literally die from that. And if they get COVID, it's more, if they actually test positive with those stupid tests that don't really do a good job, they will immediately get massive fear in the body and they think they're going to die. And that's a nocebo effect. And it kills them because the immune system suddenly gets really weak with that mass hysteria and fear. So then you can sell your products en masse, right? And then the other one is this right-wing side who push back against a lot of that. They eventually, it took them a long time, but they saw the lies of October 7th, all these rapes by Hamas, all lies. There might be a bad apple in every military, but Israel was killing a lot of the festival goers and others themselves, just in the crossfire. And they didn't try very hard not to pick out who's a terrorist and who's not. It was just a mess, right? And so now the right-wingers see that and they've gone ballistic. It reminds me of, that's what happens when people see these photos of people on intubated ventilators, right? So in COVID, right, that puts the fear of God into people. They all get very, very fearful, more and more sensationalism, more and more fear, mass hysteria. And then that weakens the immune system, weakens the health, and can even cause heart attacks and all sorts of things. And even so, you still had a tiny percent of the massively growing elderly population, which was growing much bigger at the time of these tiny number of deaths. They look big on a graph when you put them on that graph like that, but it's not. Tiny number of deaths, while the elderly population in every country was growing much bigger. So elderly population was completely wiping out the pathetic COVID effect, right? We should have been celebrating the resiliency of the elderly population. It's incredible if you look at it properly. And then on the other side, they saw those lies from October 7th and many other lies over the years. Demonization of Muslims, demonization of Hamas, demonization of Palestinians, and this sort of glorification of Israel and the Zionists. A sort of glorification of them. So now you're going to pick sides when you see the horrors that were committed on October the 7th. Mass hysteria erupts. And the only people in America, there's been a few people killed because of the mass hysteria. One of those was a 6-year-old boy in Chicago, right? Stabbed multiple times because of your mad mass hysteria over Gaza and your mass anti-Palestinian hate. Caused the death of that 6-year-old boy and some Palestinians not far from where I live, actually. And they didn't die. One of them's paralyzed for life, right? And so the others got injured, shot at because of mass hysteria. And there was maybe one other death who was an old guy, Jewish provocateur, at a rally, at a protest, under very hysterical circumstances. So you could say both sides were hysterical, but in COVID you can't. You can only say that there was one side that was completely wrong and one side that was right. And that side that was right recognised it was not good to lock everybody down, crash businesses, make people unemployed, force these medical interventions on people. I'm saying medical interventions because I'm hoping YouTube won't delete the video and my account again for saying the V word, the V word, not victory. So that great madness, I call it, of 2020, 2022, mass hysteria, mass formation hypnosis. And on the other side, now you have this mass formation hypnosis where they couldn't even listen to logic about the history of the situation with Israel and Gaza and what actually happened on October the 7th. Most of those atrocities have been debunked. In fact, it's now known that Israel killed many of the people who were running away from the crossfire that was going on, right? You cannot possibly control that situation. Israel did kill people. And then that was all blamed on Hamas. Okay, so we can go back through the history and as to why all this was, but you have to understand that it was like a prison camp. They didn't even have a port. They weren't allowed to have a port. And they had to maybe go in and out and not even be able to go anywhere. And then even in the year 2023, before October the 7th, there were Gazans bombed and killed and shot at by Israel, right? So, of course, they're going to try a breakout. So, but the mass hysteria on this side is no different than what happened in 2020, the year 2020, 2021, right? So they're the same. It's herd mentality, mass formation hypnosis. We are going to have to live with this, knowing this for the rest of our lives, that this is what people are like. Now, you can put it down to the fact that a lot of people don't have much time to think about this stuff or check out if something is true or not. Right, you can put it down to that. But that shows a problem with society, massive problem. And a lot of it does boil down to just greed. Selling weapons, giving Israel and Ukraine tons of money to buy weapons from the US to help the economy in the US by borrowing money from the future on the national debt, right? So I don't have a solution to this because it's not good right now. It's not going to be good. But the mass hysteria, mass hypnosis, mass formation hypnosis is called because it forms together. Both those groups have clearly demonstrated their inability to see the truth. It's absurd. What kind of world is this if this is the one we're going to have to live in? And it all revolves around greed and lust for power. So those things are the core of it, because otherwise you would not get the passion of the mass hysteria, the sensationalism in the media, and the money grubbing, people wanted to make money out of those situations and that kind of thing, right? So it's the greed and the lust for power, which ironically, I believe, was predicted in the Bible, that the earth will end because of greed and lust for power, or maybe it was somewhere else. Let me know. So, yeah, so that's the dichotomy and paradox, and you can see it really, really clearly. All right, so that's it. Cheers.